Dead Elm wasn't much of a town, just a sliver of civilization clawing at the edge of the Arizona territory, where the land ran dry and justice, when it came late. The wind that morning carried more dust than breath, and still, the townsfolk came. They pressed close around the courthouse, boots thudding across warped floorboards, hats tipped low, murmurs sharp as the creak of sun-blanched wood. Inside, the air was stifling, thick with heat and rumor. Judge Arlen sat stiff behind the bench, face pale from age and whiskey. Marshal Tom Granger stood to the side, his hand never far from the pistol on his hip. He didn't trust peace. Not anymore. Not since the desert ghost took his son 3 winters ago. And now that ghost sat shackled, arms bound in rusted iron, eyes unmoving under the shadow of a broad-brimmed hat. No one knew his name. Some said he was a former soldier. Some said he wasn't a man at all, just the desert's anger wearing a man's skin. He had never spoken during his capture, nor during the week they dragged him from out of the Black Ridge canyons. He hadn't fought when Granger's posse cornered him, just raised his hand slow, like a man too tired to run. The townspeople leaned forward as the trial began, hungry. They wanted blood, not just for the stolen coins, the burned rail cars, or the mail coaches turned to ash, but for the fear. For 6 years he had haunted the region, riding alone, striking without warning, vanishing like smoke. He had become a campfire tale whispered too often to children. Now they would watch the tale end. Granger called the first witness, a rail conductor from Bisbee, left for dead beside a derailed supply train. The man pointed a trembling hand at the prisoner and stammered out his story. Didn't speak a word, just stared at us like he already knew how we'd beg. Others followed. A dry-eyed widow from down near Valencia, whose husband had been shot in the leg and left to crawl home across 2 miles of scrubland. A storekeeper whose caravan had been reduced to cinders. A priest who'd lost a bell and 2 hymnals and found a bullet in his Bible. Each time, the bandit said nothing. Granger's jaw flexed tight. He looked at the judge, then at the people, then back at the man in chains. "We've waited 6 years for this," he said, voice low even. "We've buried kin, we've buried friends, and we've watched this ghost ride free across our graves. No more. Let justice do what time couldn't." The judge leaned forward, gavel in hand. Does the accused wish to speak in his defense? Silence. A moment passed, then another. The court seemed to hold its breath. The judge sighed. Then the court will prepare to deliver its verdict. That's when the doors flew open. A hush fell like a hammer. Framed by the bright, dust-swirled light stood a woman, tall and composed, her dress spotless, but her boots crusted in red dirt. The contrast was jarring. Refined silk caught against a land that chewed up elegance for breakfast. Her hair was pinned high, and her gloved hand rested lightly on the mahogany handle of a parasol that had no business out here. "I object," she said, voice clear as a church bell. Judge Arlen blinked. "Miss, you have no standing in this court. This is a criminal proceeding." "He is my husband," she said. No one moved. Granger's head tilted slightly, a tic he had when trouble surprised him. "Pardon." She stepped forward, slow but sure, like someone used to people moving out of her way. And they did. "I am Isadora Wren of Stonehill Manor," she said, each word crisp with breeding and something harder. "This man is Elias Mercer. We were married 6 years ago beneath the cottonwoods outside my family estate." The name Wren hit the room like gunfire. Everyone knew Stonehill, cattle barons, landholders, richer than any 3 towns combined. Isadora Wren had been a phantom in her own right, talked about, never seen. Her arrival felt too sudden, too calculated. Granger narrowed his eyes. "You claim this outlaw, this bandit, is your husband?" "I do." "Why come now?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Because now is when you intend to hang him." Whispers surged like a tide. The judge slammed his gavel once, twice. "This court requires evidence, not declarations." "I have it," she said, producing a folded set of letters, yellowed and worn, the ink faded but legible. His handwriting. Railroad communiques. A badge. She drew a small tin star from her coat pocket. He went undercover to infiltrate the gang responsible for robbing the Southern Line. The Desert Ghost was the mask. The man beneath it was working for justice. It was too neat, too clean. The judge examined the letters, frowning. Granger took the badge, rolled it between his fingers, then looked back at the prisoner. Elias, if that was his name, remained still. Only his eyes shifted, once, toward the woman, then away again. You expect us to believe that a man who killed. He never killed unless forced, Isadora cut in. He reported what he could. When the line was safe again, he was supposed to return. But he didn't. I searched for him for years. I found him 2 weeks ago in a mining town outside Winslow, bleeding, hiding. He didn't remember who he was. Granger stepped forward, slow. You're saying he's lost his mind? I'm saying he lost himself. And if he's to be judged, let it be with truth, not the fear you all carry like a badge. The room held its breath. Judge Arlen looked over the papers once more, brow furrowed, then addressed the marshal. We'll recess until morning. I want these verified. The gavel came down. The trial was paused, but no one moved. They stared at him, at the threads of a story suddenly unraveling into something stranger. As the room cleared, Isadora stepped close to the holding cell. Granger watched but didn't stop her. She stood before the man in chains, inches away, voice low. If you remember anything, let it be this, your real name. You are Elias Mercer. You were kind. You were brave. And I loved you. No answer. His eyes met hers, and something behind him shifted. Not a flicker of recognition, but a tremor. A crack in the mask. She smiled faintly. That's enough. For now. Outside, the wind picked up again. Dust rose in coils, and the people of Dead Elm whispered of ghosts and wives, and lies too fine to see through. Justice had paused, but not finished. Not yet. The name Isadora Wren didn't drift west often. Folks knew the Wren family owned 3 counties worth of grazing land, enough cattle to feed a railroad crew from here to Kansas, and a manor house, so grand even its ghosts were said to wear lace. But Isadora, she was myth. Eastern-schooled, never married. Too rich for the likes of cowboys and too willful for the men her father invited to dinner. Some said she rode stallions better than her brothers. Others claimed she once shot a trespasser clean through the hand for stepping on her rose beds. But no one imagined she'd ride into Dead Elm, alone, dusty, and carrying the fate of a man accused of everything from highway robbery to murder. After the trial recessed, Isadora took refuge at the town's only boarding house, a tilted stack of timber where beds creaked louder than the wind. She ignored the stairs. Word had traveled ahead of her. Townsfolk whispered behind cracked saloon doors and behind the hymnals at the chapel. Some called her foolish. Others called her a liar. But a few, those who had lost something to the Desert Ghost, looked at her with venom in their eyes. Marshal Granger knocked just past dusk. He removed his hat as she opened the door. His boots stayed at the threshold. You didn't answer my question, he said. Why now? Isadora didn't invite him in. She stood framed in lamplight, shoulders back, arms crossed, the portrait of a woman who'd grown used to holding her own. I answered it already. He nodded slowly. You told a good story. Trouble is, I've heard too many. You came for more than doubt. I came because I saw something I didn't expect. And what was that? He looked at you, Granger said. Not like a man looking at a stranger. More like someone remembering a tune he thought he'd forgotten. She glanced down the hallway before stepping aside. Then come in. Let's talk. Inside, the room was sparse but clean. A satchel rested by the bed, partway open, revealing maps, letters, and a pocket revolver half wrapped in silk. Granger raised an eyebrow. You come prepared. Isadora poured 2 fingers of rye into a glass and pushed it across the table. I wasn't born to embroidery. Granger took the glass, but didn't drink. Tell me the real version, not the court version. She sat opposite him. The real version's worse. He waited. I met Elias at a fundraiser my father was throwing, fancy affair, full of braggarts and railmen. He wasn't invited. He'd slipped in wearing a deputy's coat and a gambler's smile. Said he was working security. Turned out he was investigating one of the guests, someone skimming from the railroad contracts. But he stayed for me. And your father? Hated him. Thought he was beneath us. I thought he was the first honest thing I'd met. She took a slow breath. We married in secret. I left with him not long after. To do what? To disappear. He said he'd been offered a job, dangerous, but necessary. Infiltrate a gang that had hit rail lines from Santa Fe to Tucson. The pay was federal. The risk was death. He asked me to trust him. Granger leaned back, watching her carefully. And you never saw him again? Not until 2 weeks ago. I'd been searching cattle runs, saloons, even outlaw camps. Paid trackers. None found him. Then I caught wind of a quiet man living under an alias in Winslow. Broken leg. Old scars. Shaved his beard once a week with a knife. I knew it was him the moment I saw his hands. But he didn't know you. Not at first. He'd been shot in the head, grazing wound. Left him scattered. He remembered scraps. Faces without names. Songs we sang. But not who he was. And yet you brought him here. Let the whole town believe he's guilty. Better to face a court than to be hunted in the dark. Granger studied her. You're clever. But clever people lie just like the rest. She didn't deny it. He set the glass down and stood. I'll verify your documents. If they check out, maybe we talk to the judge. Maybe not. But if you're lying. I'm not, she said. Outside, Granger paused. Doesn't matter how this plays out. That man's soul's been carved hollow by something. Even if he walks free, he won't come back whole. I didn't come to bring him back, Isadora said quietly. I came to stand beside what's left. That night, she sat alone at the table, reading the old letters for the 100th time, some written in a rush, some smudged with blood or rain, all signed the same, yours in the fire and the silence, Yim. At the jail, Elias sat in shadow. The sheriff's lantern cast slivers of light through the bars. He leaned against the wall, face unreadable. But behind the stillness, thoughts churned, fractured, flickering. A voice returned to him in dreams, soft and warm, like spring over frost. Elias, you're not the man they fear. You're the one I remember. He didn't know if it was truth or a memory she had written for him, but it wrapped around his thoughts like a bandage. And for the first time in years, the desert ghost slept. The canyon they rode into was known only by the nameless, those who didn't belong on maps, and preferred it that way. North of Dead Elm, where the land broke into ridges and black rock, stretched a scar of twisted gulches and half-collapsed mines. It was a place where echoes lost their shape. Locals called it Scorpion Pass, but Elias, who now remembered flashes like burned edges of a journal page, called it the place where the mask first took him. 3 days had passed since the trial recessed. The documents checked out. The badge was real. So were 2 dispatches from a long-dead federal agent named Harrow, confirming Elias Mercer had volunteered to go dark. The judge had hesitated. The marshal hadn't. We ride at dawn, Granger had said. If he wants to prove his past, he better show us the ghosts he left behind. So they rode. Granger, Elias, and Isadora, with 2 deputies trailing behind, made for the canyon. It was a gamble. Elias said little. Words came slow, and his memories came slower, jagged pieces surfacing in odd patterns. Names, places, the smell of blood and dry wind. He remembered gunfire echoing off canyon walls, a gang that answered to a man called Preacher Kane, and a betrayal that nearly ended everything. Isadora rode beside him, her horse calm beneath her, her gaze fixed ahead. She didn't speak unless needed. Sometimes she hummed, like music might tether what remained of Elias's mind. Why here? Granger asked on the second day. Because this is where I buried what was left of who I was, Elias said, voice gravel-thick and certain for the first time. That morning, the sky turned the color of rust. A storm brewed far off, but the wind carried a heat that meant the land would fight it first. They entered the canyon by late afternoon. Walls of rock rose on either side, jagged and close. The sun dipped, light fractured. The wind went still. Elias dismounted and stared at a notch in the rock, shaped like a twisted tooth. There's a trail behind that bend, he murmured. Used to be a lookout there. They called it the Bone Gate. Still think we're walking into a story? Granger muttered to one of his men. I think we're walking into a grave, the deputy answered. They moved slow, rifles drawn, horses tied back. The trail curved tight around the rocks. The silence was complete, no bird, no breeze. And then, from the shadows beyond the bend, came a voice. Well now, if it ain't the ghost who forgot his sins. Elias turned first, slow, deliberate. From the stone came 3 men, dust-streaked, mean-eyed, guns slung low. Behind them stepped a 4th, tall, bone-thin, with a preacher's collar and a rifle that didn't shake in his hands. Cain, Elias said. Preacher Cain smiled. Thought you were dead. Then again, death's a slippery thing in these parts. Granger stepped beside Elias. This him. He's the one who ran the gang. Claimed righteousness. Used Bible verses like bullets. Isadora stayed behind him, watching, measuring the odds. Cain looked her over with a grin that burned cold. This your woman now. Thought you had a taste for betrayal, not charity. I came to end this, Elias said. The name, the mask, the blood. All of it. Cain chuckled. That's so. And here I thought you came to die. The guns came up. 2 more figures stepped from the rocks behind them, ambush ready. 6 in total now. Granger's fingers twitched at his holster. You boys really think this ends tidy? Cain raised his rifle. I think it ends right here, lawman. It did not. The first shot came not from Cain, nor Granger, but from Isadora. She dropped to one knee, drew from beneath her coat, and fired once. One of Cain's men collapsed, throat ruined, eyes wide. Before anyone could blink, Elias moved. He didn't hesitate. His boots found memory in the dust, and he rolled to cover behind a boulder as Cain's shot sparked past his shoulder. Granger and his deputies opened fire, the canyon erupting into thunder. Dust exploded upward. Rock chipped and cracked. One deputy screamed and fell, gutshot. Another returned fire and clipped a second outlaw in the leg. Isadora kept low, calm, precise. She moved with the surety of someone who'd fired in worse places than this. Elias reached a high perch, breath short, heart loud. He watched Cain reload behind cover, and suddenly he remembered. The night the gang turned on him, the bullet meant to silence him, and the silence that followed when he didn't die. Cain had buried him alive in this canyon, had shot him and left him beside the bones of another agent. Elias drew the revolver Granger had returned to him earlier that day. The steel felt familiar. It felt like penance. He stood from cover and shouted, Cain. The preacher looked up, and Elias shot him through the chest. Cain staggered, dropped his rifle, and sank to one knee. He clutched his side, eyes wide, mouth full of disbelief. I was your brother, he gasped. No, Elias said. You were the devil I let wear a cross. Cain fell. The rest scattered, wounded, broken, or dead. Granger emerged from behind a fallen deputy, blood on his sleeve. You could have led with that, he said, pointing at Elias. Didn't remember until it mattered, Elias replied. Isadora came up beside him, hair wind-wild, smoke clinging to her coat. She looked at the carnage, then at Elias. Is it done? She asked. He nodded, slow. It is now. But they all knew it wasn't that simple. The law would ask questions. The dead would have names. And the canyon would remember. They buried the deputy by a rock shaped like a cross. Granger said few words, but his hand lingered on the brim of his hat longer than most. That night, they camped at the canyon mouth. Elias sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. I remembered something else, he said softly. Isadora looked up. First time I met you, I spilled wine on your dress. You laughed, said red made you look dangerous. She smiled. You told me I was already dangerous. He met her eyes. I think I still believe that. She reached across the fire, took his hand. Then believe in this, too. The dead may haunt us, but they don't get to keep us. The wind stirred through the canyon again, like the land itself was exhaling. Tomorrow, they would ride back to Dead Elm. But tonight, the desert ghost dreamed not of shadows, but of a woman's laughter echoing in the firelight. They rode into Dead Elm as the sky turned bronze, the last rays of sun slanting low across the rooftops like judgment. Dust kicked beneath the horses' hooves, and the townsfolk paused, those brave enough to look. Word had traveled fast. It always did. The canyon shootout. The preacher's fall. The lawmen returning with only one deputy instead of two. And Elias Mercer riding at the head. The ghost now flesh, no longer cloaked in myth. The sheriff waited on the courthouse steps, boots planted firm, rifle cradled, but not raised. He looked at Granger first, then Elias, then Isadora, whose sharp eyes scanned the silent street, like they expected trouble not yet born. "Kane's dead," Granger said simply, dismounting. "I heard," the sheriff answered. "Word came from the telegraph at Pine Ridge. His body really out there?" "Buried with the truth," Granger replied, "and two of his men beside him. The others scattered." The sheriff looked at Elias, gaze long and careful. "You got a lot of folks confused, Mercer. Some say you were law once. Some say you vanished to dodge it." Elias dismounted slowly, his bones stiff but his voice strong. "They're both right. I went into the dark because that's where the devils were. The badge meant less than the mission, but I lost myself down there. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for clarity." The sheriff rubbed his jaw. "Clarity don't mean much to widows, not when the shooting starts. You understand." "I do," Elias said. "But the men who followed Kane, the ones who stayed hidden all these years, they're finished." Behind them, Isadora pulled a folded document from her saddlebag and handed it to the sheriff. "Signed by federal authority. Declares Elias Mercer's operations classified under deep cover. Validates his actions retroactively." The sheriff studied the seal, then sighed. "That's a lot of weight to carry after so long." "Justice ain't about weight," Elias said. "It's about balance." At that, the courthouse doors opened, and there, framed in shadow, stood the judge, the same one who had nearly sentenced Elias to the gallows. "You got nerve, riding back here," the judge said. "We called off the trial pending investigation, but we didn't promise peace." Elias stepped forward, voice unwavering. "I didn't come for peace. I came to finish what I started." Gasps rippled from the onlookers. A woman clutched her son tighter. A merchant stepped back beneath the awning. And yet no one ran. Elias looked around at the people gathered, faces carved by hardship and sun, each bearing a story the land itself had weathered. He saw suspicion in some, fear in others. But he also saw the flicker of recognition, not of the man who had once vanished, but of the one who had come back. "I remember this town when it was nothing more than tents and timber," he said, "when the only law was who had the fastest draw and the least conscience. I tried to change that. Failed. But I'm here now, and I won't leave it broken." The judge folded his arms. "You're not the law anymore." "No," Elias said, "but I'll ride with it." Granger stepped beside him. "He's earned that much." The sheriff nodded once. "You're not deputized. You're not shielded. But if you want to help clean up what Kane's boys left behind, I won't stop you." Isadora added, her tone steel-edged, "And I'll ride with him. I've seen what he's willing to give for strangers. That's worth more than a title." There was silence for a long beat. Then, from the edge of the crowd, an older man with a militiaman's limp spoke. "The ones Kane left behind, some of them are hiding in the flats past Burnt Hill. Had a run-in with them 2 days ago. Took my cattle. Shot my dog." The sheriff looked to Elias. "Think you've got one more riding you?" Elias's hand touched the revolver at his hip. "I've got as many as this town needs." They left that night. Not with a posse, not with fanfare. Just Elias, Isadora, Granger, and 2 locals who knew the ridges like their own ribs. They rode under the moonlight, past whispering mesquite trees and crickets that stilled when hooves approached. In the hours that followed, they cornered what was left of Kane's scattered gang, half-mad men, clinging to old blood and hollow power. The fighting was brief, brutal, necessary. When it ended, Elias stood over a fallen outlaw, barely a man. The boy, couldn't have been more than 18, whimpered as he clutched his bleeding side. "You don't have to finish it," he gasped. Elias holstered his weapon. "I know. And that was justice." By dawn, they returned. Not to applause, but to quiet nods and coffee brewed on porches. The sort of welcome given to people who'd earned trust without demanding it. Elias didn't ask for a title, didn't hang a badge. He took work helping rebuild what Cain's people had burned, mending fences, sharpening tools, teaching boys to shoot straight, and only when they had to. As for Isadora, she stayed. Stonehill Manor sold that spring. The money helped fund a new schoolhouse, and Isadora Whitlock, once the mystery in fine lace, became the keeper of stories, the one folks turned to when they needed to understand why legends were born from the dust. And sometimes, late at dusk, folks would see Elias on the hill above Dead Elm, watching the horizon, waiting for a shadow that never came. Because some ghosts don't haunt to scare. Some return to keep the rest from rising.